Good morning, everybody. We're live for Wednesday, April 9th. Good to have you back here on the live stream podcast. In this episode, going to be going through all of the player position opening over-unders. That's a mouthful to say here on a Wednesday morning. All of the position opening unders for all of the players. We got a handful from BetOnline. We got a handful from DraftKings as well. If you're interested in playing any of these props yourself, and maybe you don't see them at the sportsbook you play at, in the description of the YouTube video, or in the description on Apple or Spotify, there will be a link that will take you over to BetOnline. It'll take you to a page where you can see all the props. You can decide if you want to get involved and play anything. The objective of this episode is just going to try to be putting some of these into context. Like, where do I think some of these numbers came from? What teams actually give these players a reasonable option to go before or after? And just trying to put kind of some rationale behind some of these numbers that we are seeing, because this is going to be a very popular market. There's more availability at a place like DK right now than there is BetOnline. But at BetOnline, we've got a handful of guys to look at and try and make sense of. So this is going to be, I guess, part mock draft, part odds reaction, part speculation, trying to mix everything in all together. And as always, if you have comments, get them into the live chat. Be happy to answer them as we go. Kind of help me out as we get through this. If you have not yet signed up for the newsletter, footballbetters.com, free email newsletter. I will have more thoughts and potentially bets on any of these going out later this week. 17,000 bettors are following the newsletter each and every week throughout the offseason. Is the best way to keep up with everything going on in the NFL that you need to know when it comes to betting on the league. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys we're going to look at in this episode. And we'll start off with offensive lineman Armand Membou. So he is priced at 6.5. The over, which means going later than 6.5, so 7th or later, for those of you who might not be aware, is minus 250. The under 6.5, or going before 6.5, is plus 170. I think this is a pretty easy one to start off with, and a price that it makes a lot of sense, but arguably could be a little bit more. So in the first 6 picks of the draft, I see 2 teams that are possibilities for offensive linemen. And I think I'm being kind of generous with the 2. The one that would probably be the decider for this is, what is New England going to do with pick number 4? The way that the top 3 are kind of settling into place is Cam Ward number 1, Travis Hunter number 2, and then you have Abdul Carter number 3. That's Tennessee, Cleveland, New York Giants. Then it's New England at number 4. New England needs a left tackle. And recently at the annual meetings on April 1st, we heard from Mike Vrabel, who said that he believes Will Campbell can play left tackle. And he thinks that left tackle, as he mentioned, was a spot the New England Patriots could address in the draft. There was nothing in that interview that referenced Membou, who is a right tackle. And so everything that has been put out there so far suggests that the most offensive line needy team, picks 6 or earlier, which is New England, would be looking at the left tackle, and there is a direct tie to Campbell in that draft slot rather than Membou, who wasn't necessarily mentioned. And Membou is, of course, a right tackle, and so that makes it a little bit more of a difficult fit to see how he might end up going to New England. Is there a team like the New York Jets at 7 that could trade up to get Membou? I don't think that's necessarily needed. If you're a New York Jets staffer, you're probably pretty comfortable looking at 7. It's very likely the Raiders in front of you at 6 are going to pass and either go running back or defense. The way that that's looking, there's some interesting developments there that we'll talk about, but it doesn't seem like the Raiders are going to go out of their way to take an offensive lineman. The Jags at number 5 added 4 offensive linemen in the free agency window and did nothing to address the defensive line, which is something that the new GM said that they need to address this offseason and specified in the draft. So it doesn't seem like Jacksonville is going to go out of their way to add more at the offensive line position as well. So you're stuck here looking at Membou at 6.5. The 2 teams that would make sense at this front end of the draft for an offensive line are New England at 4 and the Jets at 7, with Membou at 6.5. Really, the only way that you're probably looking at this right now on April 9th and not liking the over, even at minus 250, is by saying that you think the Jets are going to trade up and get him. The Jets desperately need a right tackle. They have Okafor at the current spot, which is not going to be a day one starter. Membou makes a lot of sense for them at right tackle. So I think the spot for him to go here is 7. At 6.5, it's very much pricing that in. But of course, it could obviously be a little bit higher when you're probably tying New England to Campbell instead of Membou. So that's my take on Membou to start things off. Second player that we're seeing opening up at BetOnline is Ashton Jeanty, 9.5, under plus 175, over plus 175, under minus 260. This is going to be a lot to get through. It's hard to put it on the prompter. It's hard to put it on the banner and then get everything lined up and everything correct when you have this. So that if you're watching on YouTube, you have the prompter at the bottom of the screen. The over is on the left. The under is on the right that you are seeing in brackets. So Jeanty, 9.5, over plus 175, so 10th or later, under minus 260, 9th or earlier. This one, really, as I'm looking at the draft and what we're seeing in the top 10, the most obvious spot for him to potentially land that has been mocked a ton by respected mock drafters, that has been speculated quite a bit, that has been, I think, probably outside of the top 3, maybe the most concrete consensus thought among all of the media that is covering the draft, is that Jeanty would go number 6 to the Las Vegas Raiders. I saw a mock draft yesterday from someone that I follow who had him going 9th to the Saints. I think that's a little bit of a reach in terms of what they need on the defensive side. So I don't know if that's necessarily a place where he would go. And then what makes 9.5 interesting is the second team that has really been tied to Jeanty would be the Chicago Bears at number 10. I think this becomes a bit of a choice. If you're buying into the hype that Jeanty would go to the Las Vegas Raiders, and you think that is going to happen, and you think that everybody who's been discussing it with a lot of confidence, you're probably looking at minus 260 in the same way you were looking at Membou and being a little bit short, because you're getting a bit of a cushion here. That cushion would also give an opportunity if the Raiders elect to go on the defensive side of the football, which, looking back at the Daniel Jeremiah conference call on February 20th, that's really what his comment was. Specifically, he said he didn't know if the Raiders are there yet to take Jeanty at 6. He looked at Jeanty as more of a finishing piece. I don't think that they are ready. It's kind of what we saw with the Giants. They took Saquon that wasn't ready, and they weren't ready for him. That would kind of be my counter argument for Las Vegas, even though he has Jeanty as the 3rd pick in the draft. Now, he's kind of updated that recently in his most latest mock in late March, which had Jeanty going to the Raiders at 6 because of the trade for Geno Smith and the changes that came from that. And that kind of changed the opinion. And that sort of spurred on a lot of this change in how Jeanty's being looked at going to Las Vegas, when initially there were a lot of guys tying him to number 10 at Chicago. Now, when I'm talking about the cushion here, if you think about a team like Chicago, who might end up seeing Las Vegas potentially pass on taking him at 6, does Chicago end up possibly trading up a little bit to get him if he's sitting there at 7, 8, 9, or the Bears going to wait for him and take the chance of not getting him if he falls to 10? I think that's an interesting question that kind of became even more so with the news that Will Johnson, who's a cornerback, is now fully healthy, and he's going to be working out on Monday. And the reason that that's significant is because it was announced yesterday that immediately after the workout on Monday, he is going to Las Vegas for a private workout with the Raiders. So there is some history between the Raiders and Johnson, which has all of a sudden emerged. There were questions about his health, his medical status. That seems to be resolved, and the Raiders were very quick to book that visit with him relative to other teams. And so now all of a sudden what looked like a pretty narrow path for the Raiders to be drafting goes back into this mindset that was sort of introduced on the conference call in February, of where the Raiders were basically on the board to take the best defensive player available, and cornerback certainly a position of need for them. So that opens up a bit of discussion here on Jeanty on whether or not he is still good to go at 6 for the Raiders. But if you are looking at potentially a bit of a buffer, you do have that trade potential with Chicago. I don't think he makes it past 10. I think it's really a matter of whether or not he goes at 6 or not. Colston Loveland, the tight end, is at 19.5. Over 19.5 is plus 135. Under is minus 175. I look at this as 2 outs if you're taking the under at 19.5. And those 2 outs specifically, when we're looking at what you're going to have from Loveland, are Indianapolis and Seattle. And so both of those obviously picking before 19.5. Indianapolis with Shane Steichen. They have been tied to a tight end with just real confidence from Shane Steichen and real quotes, both provoked and unprovoked. There's a lot of smoke around the Colts wanting to add a tight end to their roster. And so would they prefer to have Warren over Loveland? Absolutely. But there's definitely an out there with a tight end needy team in the Indianapolis Colts as an option here for Loveland. The other option would be the Seattle Seahawks, who desperately need help for Sam Darnold. I think Loveland would be a very good fit. I think Loveland would make a lot of sense there as well. And there's certainly not like a significant amount of people tying that, because the most that I've seen for Loveland is that he would go earlier. And if the Bears do not get Jeanty, the Bears would go Warren, who is tight end number 1 in the class. And so really you're looking at this, if you're betting the under, you're banking on Indianapolis being truthful about what they're saying about the tight ends. You're banking on Warren going earlier, probably at that number 10 spot. And then you have your last ditch out with Seattle at 18 as an option to take the tight end. Other than that, it's hard to see a team that makes a lot of sense for taking a tight end like Loveland, and you could maybe see him slide past this 19.5 mark and go later on the first round. There's just not a lot of other teams that I would label really before the LA Chargers, who are more wide receiver needy than they are tight ends, but they just need weapons. But if he gets past Seattle, I don't know when he would end up going, quite honestly, looking down the board at what you're seeing in the draft order. And so for Loveland here, it's tight end number 2. There's 2 teams ahead of them that are sort of clear tight end needs. There's Chicago that's in a bit of a fortunate spot where they could go tight end, even though it's not necessarily needed, but just to add more weapons to that offense. And I think there's some correlation here to whether or not Jeanty is able to go early on to the Raiders or not that would have an impact on this under. Jaxson Dart, the only quarterback on the list at the moment. The other 2 quarterbacks are really tied into the specific pick markets. I think we're going to see some movement with Sanders as well. He's a guy that we can talk about tomorrow. He's at 8.5. That's one we'll get to tomorrow. Jaxson Dart at 24.5, over minus 150, under minus 200. So Jaxson Dart to me is a 1-team, 1-out bet if you're betting on the under at 24.5, and that out is the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think it's basically as simple as that. I don't know what other teams anywhere on this list at 24.5 or better would be interested in a quarterback aside from the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if you're talking about obviously number 1 and number 2 in Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, those 2 guys are going to go to very, very likely Tennessee at number 1. Whether or not Sanders ends up sliding a little bit, does he go 9 to the Saints? They're favored to do so. If he's still around at 21, I think the Steelers would obviously be very interested in him. And so an under on Dart here at minus 200 is betting that both of those 2 guys go very early, and the Steelers are around to take a quarterback at 21. That it's really one path, one out. I would be surprised if there's another team behind that trades up. Perhaps it's a possibility, but I think if any team is going to trade up from the top half that elects to pass on a QB that takes them again, they're probably trading up to get Sanders mid to late in the first round, rather than the Steelers moving up to get a guy like Dart, or anybody else moving up to get a guy like Dart number 3 late in the first round as well. And so minus 200 initially, to me, a little bit extreme for 1 team and 1 out, I believe, with Pittsburgh. But that's really the only path. If you see another path, let me know in the chat. I haven't seen a lot of other scenarios where this happens and he's not going to Pittsburgh, and that's obviously dependent on both of the other guys going early. I think we're comfortable with Ward going 1, as that's out to minus 100,000, minus 10,000 at some places, like 99% implied probability on a lot of these places. As you get to number 2 with Sanders, I think there's a little bit more variability with that. But Dart at 24.5 to the under, I think is really banking on that pick for Pittsburgh, making it happen at 21. On a side note, Milroe from Alabama is going to be at the draft. Usually when you see these announcements of guys at the draft that are attending it live in person, it's a pretty good indication that they're going to be day one guys. The interesting thing with Milroe is there's not anybody that expects him to be a day one pick. And so I don't know if that's necessarily clouding things up here with this price on Dart at all, but I kind of look at that as a non-factor or non-impact to this price at the moment, unless something further comes up. Good comment here. Crunch Time Sports. Could the Rams leapfrog the Steelers and select Dart? So the Rams are picking at 26. There was a quote specifically that came up yesterday where it was talking about Sean McVay and Les Snead, and it got picked up by Underdog, the alert service. And the quote said that Sean McVay spent considerable time with Jaxson Dart. And so the under moved from minus 220 on this price down to minus 200 in some speculation that Dart was maybe going to fall later on in the first round and then go over as the Rams are picking 26. What was omitted from those quotes that were sent around and picked up by the alert services was the fact that the original quote, which came from Adam Schefter, also said that the Giants and the Saints were spending considerable time with Jaxson Dart as well. And so the quote made it seem like the Rams were the most interested of any team and just kind of left out a little bit more of the story that downplayed it a little bit. But there certainly was ties there with the Rams looking at that. Changing 500, any indication that the Steelers like Milroe over Dart? Nothing that I have seen and nothing that I've read. If you've seen different, let me know in the comments, but I haven't seen that yet from anything that I've read or listened to. Next player up that we're looking at is Mason Graham, 5.5 over plus 115 under minus 155. This is becoming a little bit more interesting. So Tennessee, Cleveland, New York, for the most part, picks 1, 2, 3 are tied to other players. New England, as we talked about, very likely to be an offensive lineman. Is it going to be Campbell? I think that's the better bet at the moment. Then it would be Membou. And so that kind of takes up number 4, which brings Mason Graham here at 5.5 with the one out, I would say, in this being the Jacksonville Jags. Now, what we've seen from the Jaguars so far is new GM in pressers has talked about how the defensive line is a priority to look at. They added 4 offensive linemen, which really satisfies some of the conference call notes that I took, where Jacksonville was labeled to be a team this offseason that was attacking both sides of the trenches. I'm pretty confident in ruling out Jacksonville looking to take an offensive lineman at number 5. And I think that this priority that they have labeled and discussed about adding on the defensive line kind of stands out and makes a lot of sense to me. So when it comes to the defensive line, Graham makes a lot of sense in at the middle, but there's also a number of other guys here that could make a lot of sense. And it's kind of hard to figure out where the Jags might ultimately go and what they might look at this position specifically. He between need and fit, he makes a lot of sense, incredibly consistent. But I also wonder, do we see a guy like Jalen Walker, who's absolutely labeled as a lock to go in the tight end? Does Jacksonville elect to maybe go with Walker and then form a trio with Hines Allen and Trayvon Walker, who they drafted a couple years ago? And then you have guys you can really mix in and out. You can have Jalen Walker potentially play off-ball linebacker. You have 3 pass rushers that can rotate. It kind of becomes an interesting dynamic. So did the Jags go and get a guy like Graham in the middle who can shore up things against the run and be that presence in the middle and just dominate leverage? Or do they go more athleticism and skill and take a guy like Walker, who at times was projected to go slightly higher, but now with the way that things are shaping up, do we see him end up going number 5 to the Jags? And so to me, that really becomes the choice. What's interesting with a guy like Mason Graham is a team like Carolina, who's picking number 8. They really went after Mykel Williams in free agency, and they did not end up getting him. The Pats ended up taking him from the Panthers. Everything about Mason Graham would fit what they were going after. And so is there intrigue here from the Panthers to potentially get him? If the Jags go Walker at 5, I would definitely see the Panthers at 8 being very interested in potentially taking him as well. So it's a tough price to be comfortable with the under, unless you have a lot of conviction that Jacksonville is interested in him being the pick for them. So this is a bet that I would look at right now and say it's kind of like a one-way, one-lane option, where if you see anything, maybe you're digging up past quotes, maybe you're listening to Jacksonville media, maybe you hear something tied in, then you could probably have a lot of conviction here at under 5.5, because you're kind of looking at one player, one team. I don't think the other 4 ahead of Jacksonville here are necessarily a threat to take him. And so this is kind of an easy handicap if you can find any info. Chris asks, has Jacksonville been directly linked to him, or is this number just driven by need and fit? I would say it's more of the latter at this point. So that's why I'm saying it becomes a pretty easy handicap to look at down the line. There's, if you get any info that makes sense, that stands out in the next couple of days, that under at 155 looks really good. Otherwise, I don't know how you can necessarily be comfortable laying it without really any outs or any safety net here on it. It's a pretty narrow window where it effectively is one player, one team. Mykel Williams, 15.5 over -130, under -110. This is kind of interesting. So Dane Brugler this morning posted The Beast, which is a great draft guide over at The Athletic. He has Williams as edge rusher number 5 in the draft, behind Mike Green, Shamar Stewart, Jalen Walker, and Abdul Carter. So I think pretty confident that we're going to see Carter go very early. When it comes to edge rush needy teams, you would have the Giants, you would have Jacksonville potentially if they don't go inside. You would have a team like Carolina, who's openly talked about needing to add to the pass rush and the defensive line. A team like New Orleans on the fringe, depending how things fall, but definitely have needs on the defensive line and linebacker. San Francisco definitely has needs there. And then Atlanta at 15 would kind of be the last option here, but that is another team. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams that I would say you could confidently put in needing defensive line help, that have openly talked about needing defensive line help. And then a team like the Saints and a team like the 49ers kind of on the fringe. So let's call it 6 open spots. Mason Graham from the defensive tackle is going to be in there and going to go high, as we just talked about. And then you have 5 edge rushers plus Derek Harmon, defensive tackle number 2, to kind of fill in these other spots. So this, to me, with Williams, I would be looking more under than over, just because I go back to the conference call and how Williams was referenced and how he was talked about. He was labeled as being a consensus lock to go top 10 if he was not hurt in the Clemson game. So I think there's some variability and a bit of a wider range on where he could go. And I wonder if 15.5, being on the other side of the Falcons, who have talked about it being a goal this offseason to fix their pass rush, if you see some of these other guys going early or think they would, at 15.5 here with the number, you're getting a pretty good opportunity to have a bit of a window there. This number at 16.5 if that is ever posted anywhere and Arizona is added into this mix, another team, although very likely to try push for a trade back, but a very edge rush defensive line needy team, even with the free agency additions. And so I think with a guy like Williams on the under at -110, you have probably an extra team then labeled ahead in these 15.5 spots, to where even if teams don't necessarily react to Williams in that top 10 consensus comment from earlier in the conference call in February, even if that hype doesn't pick up between now and the draft, you still have a decent cushion here to where you have some outs here with Williams. And again, if this ever gets to something like 16.5 and you add Arizona into this, then that's a pretty easy decision. But at 15.5, albeit a little bit thin, I still think opportunity there where there's more teams than not in this range. The last one that has been posted that is worth talking about at the moment is Omarion Hampton, running back. He is posted at 19.5. That's the same at BetOnline and DraftKings, over -175, under +135. This is labeled as the deepest running back draft class in several years. There are two guys who headline it, Ashton Jeanty and Omarion Hampton. And then there's a tweet that came out today from a great draft analyst who was saying that everyone that he has been talking to, GMs and coaches, tend to have a very different opinion on who running back 3 is in the draft. And it's very clear that it's Jeanty 1, Hampton 2, and then there's a drop-off. And so at 19.5, the very clear team that makes a ton of sense here would be the Denver Broncos at 20. I think we're seeing this at 19.5 because the decision is there another team ahead of Denver in the draft who's going to risk taking the running back early? I shouldn't say risk, but go out of their way to do it rather than waiting for day 2 and 3, where there's a number of guys that teams are going to be interested in taking. It's effectively, do you pay the premium for these elite guys, or do you get one later on? Because there's going to be plenty of opportunities to get running backs later if you're not going to be taking them on day 1. I think there's 2 teams ahead of Denver which would make sense for Hampton and taking him. One would be the Raiders. Obviously, they're tied to Jeanty. I'm talking about needing a running back. 2 would be the Chicago Bears. Everything that I have seen leading up to this point, aside from some mocks putting Hampton at 10 for the Bears, have suggested that that would be a pretty big reach from Chicago. And Chicago would probably have the opportunity to pick between Warren or Hampton at number 10. And if that's the case and they go offensive player rather than going offensive line, it's hard to justify taking Hampton over Warren in that context. So that's, I think, what this bet is on. Denver at 20, with Sean Payton wanting a running back that can play 3 downs, wanting a running back that's great catching the ball out of the backfield. Denver makes a ton of sense at 20. And so over at -175 makes a lot of sense unless you think the Bears are going to reach here for Hampton at 10. Otherwise, I don't see a team in this window that would make sense to take Hampton. And so with some of this news lately that is suggesting that Jeanty to the Raiders is maybe not as much of a slam dunk as it seemed to be this time last week, if he slides a little bit, then you have probably some of these teams interested in that. And then that would just push Hampton back even further. So that's how I would look at Hampton at 19.5. The number's there because the Broncos are the decision point. And I don't know how you can necessarily be comfortable with this under unless you just have a real high level of conviction that he is going number 10 to the Chicago Bears. So to recap here, Membou at 6.5. The only way you're looking at the under is if you think the Pats do something to take him. I think Membou makes a lot of sense. 7 to the Jets to fill the need at right tackle. Campbell makes a lot more sense to me for New England to fit the left tackle need that they have. And those are both of the guys' natural positions. And so at 6.5, man, that's a tough under to justify, certainly. Jeanty 9.5 really becomes, do the Raiders take him? And if not, do the Bears trade up? Otherwise, you would be looking at the over. Loveland at 19.5. you've got a 2-team window between the Colts and the Seahawks. I think that's the extent of it. Dart at 24.5 is Steelers or nothing, in my opinion. At 21, some smoke with the Rams. That was a good comment that was brought up. Rams are at 26. Did they go out of their way to trade up to get him? I don't know if they go out of their way to do that, but it's effectively Steelers or nothing here if you're looking at the under. Mason Graham directly tied to the Jacksonville Jags. What do they do at number 5? Don't think he goes 1, 2, 3, or 4. It really comes down to what do the Jags do at 5. Mykel Williams at 15.5. What happens with these pass rushers early? There's more teams here to fill these spots based on the rankings. And do you buy into the top 10 hype coming back? If so, you probably really like the under here at minus 110 at 15.5. If you ever see a 16.5 and you get Arizona added into this as more books open, that's a pretty easy decision. And then Hampton, 19.5. Broncos make a ton of sense at 20. Tough to justify teams going sooner than that with him at the running back position. Chris says, are you under the impression that Dallas is out on Hampton? Heard some conflicting stuff, but would agree they're probably not in the market for him anymore. I think the Cowboys go wide receiver, whether that's Golden or McMillan. I would be quite surprised if they reach and go for Hampton rather than going for a wide receiver with what's going to be available. I don't know if any of these wide receivers end up going top 10. I think Dallas has the potential to where they have the pick of either or to go at that spot. And so me, Cowboys wide receiver makes a little more sense than Cowboys running back. And similar to Chicago, maybe reaching a little bit at 10. It's probably a reach for Dallas at 12. I want to just quickly pull up something because I do believe there was actually a quote, Chris, that I'm going to look up before we end. This was a good question and kind of just reminded me of something. I'm just going through my notes here. There was who was asked about, someone was asked, it was either Schottenheimer or Jones, where they were asked about taking a running back, obviously a very running back centric scheme with Schottenheimer. I don't know if I can find it right off the top. Here we go. The quote specifically was from Schottenheimer last week. You're always looking for game changers when you're picking 12th. You're looking for guys who influence the game. You rush the quarterback, you get sacks, strip sacks, fumbles, whatever it is. You score touchdowns. You build it from the outside in. You've got corners, receivers, pass rushers, and tackles getting isolated one-on-one. I think what's been proven over the course of the last 8 to 10 drafts is running back depth and ability to find backs late in the draft make it where taking a running back early isn't a priority. If the best player available is a running back and we feel like it's a great fit, we should do it. Chris, hearing him say that, I have a hard time believing Hampton would be the best player available at 12. I don't think he would be rated higher than either of the receiver options. And if you have a guy like Warren slipping, then you're probably looking at him as the best player available at the tight end role. So I think that makes it a little bit tough hearing Schottenheimer say that as the new head coach and then being confident that you might have them reach and overpay for Hampton. Don't get me wrong. I know Jerry would take 3 running backs in the first 3 rounds if he could and then line it up if it was up to him. But man, I don't know if they do that. So that was the quote that popped out to me from last week on Hampton to the Cowboys specifically. All right. That will do it for me today. Hope everybody has a fantastic Wednesday. There were a few more guys, as well as DK had some individual guys that weren't posted at Bet Online. And tomorrow's episode at the same time, I will be going through those guys as kind of like the outliers or lesser widely available. And then on Friday's episode, we'll go through all of the positional totals, kind of run through a bit of a mock draft and put some things together and say like how many O-line, how many D-line, how many safeties, how many wide receivers, stuff like that for all of the markets that are posted up and available at a lot of different places. So that's what's coming up the rest of the week. Reminder, footballbetters.com, free email newsletter, free for everybody to follow, free to sign up. You will get emails keeping you up to date with everything going on in the off season through the spring and the rest of the summer leading up to the season. And if you're curious and want to bet on any of the props that were discussed in this episode, in the description of the YouTube video or on Apple or Spotify, there is a link that will take you over to BetOnline, where you can deposit and play any of the props that were mentioned in this show. Have a fantastic Wednesday, everybody. We'll chat to you again tomorrow morning.